Okay, let's start with the material for the body. And if you click on the materials tabs and you don't see anything here, just click the middle mouse button in this window and it will come up. I think it's still a bug, but it doesn't really bother me because all you need to do is click the middle mouse button. Press plus to add a new material and let's select new. Start from scratch with this material. Let's call it body. And let's start making a few changes. First of all, let's make it a bit darker. And the specula, we don't need plastic, we need organic materials, so I'll set the specula to 0.23 and to 20 over here. And now if I scroll up, we don't see the material anymore, but that's no problem. We'll just take the properties here and create ourselves a new window with the material settings inside, which works fine. Organic materials are almost always translucent, at least if the animal that's consisting out of the material, yeah, makes sense, is as small as this one, because in reality this is about 1 millimeter and it's about 1/4 millimeter thick, so this is fairly translucent. So let's put it to the highest value, take 1, and on the transparency let's make the speck even softer and also give the material an overall Z transparency by changing the Fresnel to 1.28. You can start seeing in the middle of the sphere where the rays that go through the sphere are almost parallel to the camera. This is where the transparency will occur, and since it's not ray tracing, there's no bending of the light. So if you wanted to make a looking glass, you'd have to choose the ray trace material option, and well, then change the IOR. Okay, there you go, looking glass. Okay, we don't want that. So let's change the spec to 1.8 and increase the blend mode a little bit. And what other options do we have here? Not that important for the moment. What other options have we here? There is the subsurface scattering, and subsurface scattering is a very nice way of making.
Hello, my name is Frederik Steinmetz. Welcome to the third part of my tutorial on single-cell organisms in Blender.
If you have
and today we'll
organic
focus
material
on
like
material and
human,
render settings. So let's get
you
started.
will see that the light will penetrate the first layer of the skin, the epidermis, and get scattered by the lower tissues. And some of the scattered light will be reflected back through the surface of the skin. And subsurface scattering simulate this progress, which does not occur in plastic, of course, because plastic is totally opaque. But if you take wax, for example, that works very well with subsurface scattering. I'll select the whole milk preset from the preset lists, one of the few things where Blender actually does have presets. And let's change the texture weight to 0.2 because we'll be applying textures later on, or actually now. Okay, here we are in the texture panel, and you see you have as many texture slots as you want. And let's just create a new texture. Let's just leave it at clouds, but change a few of the settings. For example, make the size 0.3 and the depth up to 3, which makes the clouds a little bit bigger but a little bit more complex. And also the coordinates, since our little bell animal is more shaped like a tube than like a flat surface or a sphere, we'll change the coordinates to tube. The projection to tube, and the coordinates leave it general. I only want the color to affect this material 50%, and also I want the normals to be affected by 0.5, and also the color here I'll make grayish white, something like this. And now to add a second texture, let's call this clouds again. It will probably make call this clouds again, and this new texture I'll name veins, because it'll look a little bit like veins once we change this here to Voronoi F2 or Voronoi or Voronoi. Well, you decide how to pronounce it, I don't know. Just make a few adjustments to this. Size up to 0.3 again, and the depth down to 1. And also change the coordinates to 2, the projection, sorry again. And the normal change to 0.8, and we don't want the color of this to affect our texture. Press 0 on the numpad to look through the camera, and let's just make a quick test render. Okay, this is way overexposed, but we'll get to the lighting situation later. Just have a look at the hairs right now, because they really look hideous. And this is what we're going to change right now. So in the material settings of our body, let's add a second material, and this is a little bit tricky. If you're not used to Blender and you add a new material, you have to be careful, because this is two instances of the same material. If I change something in those settings, you'll see that it'll immediately affect both the materials. So let's change this back, and you can see over here there are 3 objects using this material. One is a safety object that I created, because if this material doesn't have any users and you save and reopen your file, the material will be deleted. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And the little 3 over here indicates that 3 objects, one safety cube and the 2 slots of my body material, are using this body material. And to make a new material as a copy of the body, you'd have to click this little number here and make it a single user. But I want my hair to start from scratch, because we don't need all the subsurface scattering and texture and transparency options, so I'll just make a new material over here. See, if I press the X, we still have the slot available, and I'll just press new and call this hair. Let's just make a few adjustments. Let's set the diffused color, make it a little darker, something like this, and the specular, make it a little softer, 0.31, and hardness 20 should do. Actually no, let's make it even a little harder than before. And important is to change the alpha to 0, because we'll be having a texture later on that is going to affect the alpha. And if you change the alpha to 0 and don't check transparency, let me show you what happens then, because it's confusing at first, but it's a very handy feature. I'll make a plane that covers most of the screen, and I'll add a hemi light just to light our scene, and also I'll add a cube. Okay, now the cube is above our plane, and if we render this, you can see the cube and the plane. If I now make a material for the cube and call this see-through, and I give this cube an alpha of 0 without checking the transparency, then the cube will punch a hole into the entire scene. No matter what is behind it, the cube will punch a hole through it. So we have to check the transparency, and you can see now it's reduced to the spec. And let's get on with the textures. Let's add a new texture, call this alpha blend, because it's a blend texture and it will affect the alpha channel. Okay, we are going to use a ramp, because the ramp gives us more control over our blend texture, and let's go to strands here already so we can see what we're doing. Let's adjust the ramp just a little. We pull over the white slider over here, and in order to be able to see what we're doing, we'll just check the alpha value, and you can see our strands are back. And I think we need to switch those two sliders, and also you can see that if I drag the slider over, you can see that some of the strands disappear, but we don't want that. We want the tips to get smoother. So in order to get that, we get the coordinates not from generated, but from the single strands themselves. And you can see now the strands are nice and smooth, and the tips are really blending very smoothly into the background. If I make another test render of this, I'll turn off the subsurface scattering before that, because it really takes a long time. And right now we're just looking at the cilia, but go into detail of saving render time later on. Okay, that does not look very good. We'll change the background color to black. Oh, I didn't check transparency. Well, that's a good idea to do that, because well, then exactly what I explained earlier happens. We can see that the tips are fading and they're becoming a tiny bit spiky, but this is not enough for me, so I'll change the texture. I'll put the slider even more over here. That will make the strands shorter, but also the tip, the beginning of the fade, will start earlier. Now let's head over to the color of our particle. And the particles have, since they are a custom object, the particles will have their own color assigned from our main particles. So and the main particle still has the clouds texture. If you remember that it has a modifier which will distort or displace the vertices using the clouds texture. So we should not mess with the clouds texture settings. Just create a new texture and leave this check mark checked off, because otherwise our particle will have texture features that we not necessarily want. Because our particle is so small, we are going to increase the size of the texture. Let's make it 0.5 and the depth 3, and also map it to color and normal. Since the particle is very small, the settings aren't that important. Just make sure it's not purple, because most particles underwater are not purple. And we can change this to sphere, since our particle is sort of a sphere. And let's yeah, there we go. If you lose some particles or some of the settings are messed up, you want to press Shift and back arrow, and if that doesn't work, press Alt A to recalculate the particles in the animation. Let's render this. Well, the texture on the particle really doesn't change that much. Let's just try and make it a lot smaller. And if that doesn't do anything, we'll just leave it as it is, because most of the particles will get blurred out anyways later on. Oh, the texture is not checked. Okay, that's not very clever. Call this particle bumps. Let's try this again. We don't see that much of a change in the texture, so I'll just leave it at this for now. Particles are very small, so you won't really be able to make out a difference anyways. Maybe later on in the better render settings, we'll see. Okay, our scene is set up so far. Let's make some space over here. And if you press T and N, our tool and object informations will disappear. And let's check this. The particles are flowing towards the bell animal very fast. Change that in a second, and they're getting sucked into the little guy's mouth. Gravity over here is a little bit too strong, so I'll fix that real quick. But as I said, these settings require a lot of tweaking, and even though I have done this before, it's really hard to just transfer to another blend file, because just the slightest changings in this curve for the gravity can result in very unwanted settings or very unwanted results. So I'll leave it up to you to continue tweaking the cilia particle system. But you can see they're being attracted to the animal a little too much for my taste, by the way. So let's change the strength to -1.5 and the flow to 0.8, and run the simulation again, but use 10 times the particles, because we'll be able to see a lot better what's going on. See, the particles are attracted, and once they get into the reach of the vortex, they'll be sucked in, and the reach of the vortex is a bit too low, so I'll just increase the size a little and increase the maximum distance just a bit. And earlier I was saying that you can make the object of the bell animal to be a reflector or deflector that causes some of the particles to sort of stick to its surface and travel along the surface. And if you want to reduce that effect, actually right now it's working quite well, you can always add a new force field, for example just another force, and make the strength to 1 and make it as subtle as possible. First of all, use the distance, the minimum distance, because right here we don't need any effect. Also use the maximum distance like this, so you will repel particles that come too close to our sphere object. And to make this render a lot faster, I'm going to bake these particles. Scroll all the way down and bake. That was quick. So we don't have to worry about those particles being baked every time we run the simulation. Now, if we move the camera around, I'll go to the 3D view here, so I can look through the camera over here, and also move the camera around. You can see that our particles are in 3D space, and they move really nicely when you look through the camera. So that means we're ready for our lighting situation. Right now I press Alt-H on the first layer and press H to hide the cube again, and all I used was this little hemi light, and that's just for the purpose of test rendering. I'll use a sun this time, and let's position this sun behind the camera and projecting onto our scene. Let's press 3 to get into side view and have the sun over here. The intensity is a bit high. Let's take the energy down to 0.8. And also, this scene is underwater and in a microscopic environment, so we'll leave the no shadow checked, because we hardly want any shadow in this scene. The subsurface scattering will mostly take care of the shadow. And let's add a very nice effect. If you remember, we had the volumetric lighting here. It's fairly subtle, but in the animation you can see it that these rays are actually animating. And the secret to do this is to have an obscure object and have the light go through that object. So I'll go to a new layer, press Shift C to get the cursor back to the center, and press 5 on the numpad to get back into orthographic view, and press Shift A to get a new plane. Scale it up a little by pressing S, press Tab to get into edit mode, press W and subdivide it a couple of times. If I do something in edit mode, it's really hard to undo it, so I'll press Shift D and duplicate my object at a point where I'm fairly certain I'm still going the right direction. I press M and 0, and I usually use those layers over here, those layers, as sort of a dumpster where I keep my duplicated stuff just in case I do something stupid and don't realize it, so I don't have to start over. So just click randomly, looks okay, I guess. And if those square holes bother you, just click on 2 vertices of each hole and press S. You can see what I'm doing. Those two that are the furthest away from each other, so you get more round holes. So just right click on 2 of the vertices and press S to scale them down. And of course you can make different holes if you want to. Just click on some of the vertices and press G. Just make this as random as possible. For example, I can use another hole in here, and if it's too large for your taste, you can just make a face here. It doesn't matter that this vertex is free now, because we want as many holes in here as possible anyways. Okay, let's leave it at that for now and add a circle. Press Alt G to make it to get it to the middle, and scale it up so that the cylinder covers every hole of our surface. Now tab into edit mode, E for extrude, and Alt M to merge at the center. You can see we now have a filled out circle. And actually let's undo this and press E for extrude and scale it down so we have a few more segments to control. Alt M at center. Okay, now press Control Tab and select Faces, and again randomly select some of the faces, and this will make sense in a second. Usually it's not very good to have 2 adjacent faces selected, so I'll unselect this one, press X, and this one choose only faces. So you'll just punch a bunch of holes into the cylinder. And if I press R now, you can see my cylinder will rotate and only leave light through the holes that are in both the cylinder and the plane I created. And so what we'll do is we'll parent the plane, we'll parent the cylinder to the plane, and this will make sense in a second. Control P to parent this to the object, because if we did this otherwise, if we parented the plane to the cylinder, then if the cylinder rotates, the plane will rotate as well. And this way we can rotate the plane, and we can rotate the circle, and the plane stays in place. And if we want to move or rotate them, we can use the plane to do that. And in order to make this rotate continuously, I'll go to the first frame, shift arrow back, press I and make a keyframe for rotation. Then I'll press the up arrow, go forward 11 frames, and let's say we rotate it by 10 degrees, so 1 degree per frame. That doesn't sound too much, so rotate it 50 degrees. Press I to insert a rotation keyframe again, and choose the graph editor down here. Choose the selection mode, so that you only have your active object. You only see your active object in the graph editor, and also the scene is always active, so let's hide the gravity. Press A twice and then Shift E, and say linear extrapolation. What that does is it will continue rotating 1.5 degrees per one frame. Let's see, this is actually quite much. So if you want to change this later on, you can select this keyframe and press G, X and -5. No, that was not the keyframe. The keyframe is down here. G, X, -5. And now the rotation is slower. Oh, sorry. +5. +5. There you go, slower rotation. In order to make this a volumetric light, we'll add Shift A and add a spotlight, because the spotlights are the only ones that are able to cast halos. Let's show the cone of this so we can easily see whether we're going around our circle or not, and position this light so it almost covers the cone. Now, over here in the light material settings, we'll select, we have to keep on buffer shadow because otherwise the halo won't show, and we have to select halo somewhere. Where to go? There it is. And if you render this out, you will see that the light ray is not influenced by our obscure object over here, and the reason for that is you have to set the steps at least to 1 in order to have Blender calculate the shadows to the halo. And I usually set it a little higher than 1, and let's say 3. Also, this energy is pretty much, and let's make the halos a bit yellowish, or the halo of the light ray. And if we render this again, you can see our halo is being altered by the obscure object, but the cone is way too big. I mean, the light is too far away from our object. So let's get it closer and render this again. Okay, let's just adjust a few settings. Make the cone angle a bit wider, and of course then we have to put the light closer to our scene, well, to our obscure object. And we'll set the intensity settings and all this later on, because when we have an actual reference with our scene. And let's parent the plane to the light, and this way we can rotate the light and our objects will stay in place. Okay, that's our volumetric light for now. I'd say we just leave it here on layer 3, press A and M and 3. And Shift 2 and Shift 1, so we have the rest in our scene as well. And move this up, press 3 on your numpad, and position the light somewhat further away, and you can see that the light will be cut off. So we have to adjust that by increasing the light distance to around 40. And that should do for now. Let's render this. It's really hard to tell from this angle, so I'll just press 0 on the numpad, T and N, and manipulate my light from this viewpoint. G and Yeah, that should fit. And Control S to save, and here you can see that the light rays are a lot more subtle now. Okay, let's continue decorating our scene a little. I'll go into a new layer. Let's press 4 and delete this stuff. Don't need it anymore. 7 and 5 on the numpad to get into top view and orthographic view. Press Shift A and add an icosphere. Press S and X to make it a bit less sphere shaped. And also press Ctrl 2 to apply a 2 times subdivision surface to it, and press T to make it smooth. Now press Tab to get into edit mode, Control Tab to get into vertex mode, and O to get into connected editing mode. And just select one of the vertices and scroll your mouse wheel until you have the proportional editing settings that you prefer for this. And just all I'm doing here is make the entire structure of that thing a bit more irregular, because it will be our rock on which the background animals will be sitting on. Press Tab if you like the results to get back into object mode. And let's give this rock a nice material. Press New, call it rock, and make it a bit darker. And the specula 0.1 and 10, those are the typical settings that I always use when I'm modeling organic material. I almost always use intensity 0.1 and hardness 10. And let's give this rock a nice texture. New, call it crackle. Leave the settings to clouds, but use, instead of Blender Original, use Voronoi Crackle. And give this thing a ramp. We'll switch those two, so it goes from white to black, and also make the black alpha to be 1. And now the crackle looks like this. And we'll have it affect the color a tiny bit, but the normal is 4.5. And let's check out how the material looks. We can click on both here, and we have our rock material. It's just a bit too bright for my taste, so I'll just lower the diffuse color until it gets a bit darker. There we go, rock. That concludes the third part of this tutorial. In the fourth part, I'll be creating some more objects for the background and also showing you some of the final render settings, including the compositor.